Are you someone who plays sport and would like to get better? Or are you an aspiring athlete who is chasing the dream? In this episode of Me and My Health Up, we'll be examining a new approach to athlete wellness with Dr. Erin Ayala. I'm your host, Anthony Harcher, a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your well-being. And today we'll be chatting with sports psychologist, Dr. Erin Ayala. Dr. Erin Ayala is a licensed sports psychologist at Premier Sports Psychology in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. She provides individual sports psychology sessions for adolescents and adults, conducts ADHD assessments for collegiate athletes, and directs research and outcomes assessment initiatives at Premier. Dr. Ayala has authored over a dozen peer-reviewed research publications and book chapters on prevention and health promotion, diversity, and sports psychology. She is a certified mental health performance consultant and is listed on the US Olympic and Paralympic Mental Health Registry. So welcome, Erin. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
We're so delighted to have you. I know there's many athletes that listen to this podcast, so they'll be super excited to hear what you've got to share today. So we've got to get started with my famous question, and that is, how have you arrived at what you're doing today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I was reflecting on this earlier today and how to summarize it. And it really is like the perfect confluence or combination of personal and professional coming together. I was always interested in psychology. And so I did that as an undergrad student and had some advisors who encouraged me to go to grad school. So I did. And I wanted to help people. So I went into the counseling psychology route. And it was in grad school. It was kind of an aha moment where I was sitting in front of the apartment that I was renting. And I'm a former smoker. And I was smoking a cigarette and thinking to myself, I'm really proud of where I am in terms of academics and everything I'm done, but I'm not proud of like who I am inside. And it was kind of a big wake up call. And I slowly started exercising and I joined a running club. And then I joined a triathlon club. And now I'm a cyclist, and it was really me learning more about sports psychology that decided like, I want to specialize and go into this field. So that's kind of, it was my own wake up call that led me here, which is, I think, really cool. It's been a neat journey.
Oh, absolutely. It's inspirational, coming from, I guess, that other end of the spectrum in terms of health, and really then, I guess, going to the other end, because I know you're a very keen cyclist, runner, and you compete. So tell us a bit more about your running, your cycling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did. I started with 5Ks, and like a lot of runners, that turned into 10Ks and then half marathons and then marathons. I've done, I think, 9 marathons, and it was all during grad school. It was a great way for me to prioritize self-care, because if I was registered for a race, I knew I had to train for it. And then that turned into triathlon. I started with sprint triathlon, worked my way up to the Ironman full distance triathlon in Lake Placid, New York. And I've done a handful of 70.3s. That was probably my favorite distance. And then I found cycling. And I've been cycling since 2016 or 2017 pretty regularly. Gravel cycling, like endurance, is probably my favorite, as well as road cycling. So I do a lot of criterium races here in the States. And then for gravel, I've done some ultra endurance, like 200-mile events. This past Saturday, I had a 110-mile gravel race. So that's where I am right now.
Wow, that's incredible. A 200-mile race. It's a long way.
It was a long day. Yeah.
A long day on the saddle, so they say.
Yeah, mm-hmm, yeah. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Yeah, I'm really interested because you're at the cutting edge end of, I guess, sports psychology in terms of leading the way, and you've really embarked on some current research, and you're now rolling this great research out to make it practical for athletes. So I'm really excited for you to be sharing what this cutting edge research is around athletes' well-being.
Yeah, it's neat. It's kind of a fun backstory. I think, in clinical and counseling psychologists, it's considered best practice to do outcomes assessment where you monitor the well-being of your clients and see if they're improving over time. Sports psych is a little bit different because it's not just about well-being. It's also about performance in sport. And so I think athletes can often feel this pressure to choose one or the other. Right? Like if they're training, then their mental health might take, the back seat. Whereas if they're prioritizing their mental health, then their performance might go out the window. And I'm basically making the argument that it's a false dichotomy. Like you can have both of those things if you're able to prioritize, in this case, 7 factors that contribute to finding that sweet spot and that right balance. And so what we did, my team, we found 43 athletes, coaches, and sport medicine professionals, and at all levels, collegiate, amateur, professional, and Olympic. And we asked them one question. We said, what are the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that contribute to optimal performance and mental health in athletes? And it was really cool because it's taking an interdisciplinary approach to wellness as opposed to just sports psychology or just coaching. And everyone has a unique perspective to bring in. So our goal was to get that big picture to see, like, what does this actually look like from a holistic point of view? So we had them answer that question. They had over 300 responses. So then we had the fun job of combing through them and kind of cleaning the data. And we got down to 113. And then we said to them, I want you to rate each of these behaviors based on how important they are to mental health. And then same thing, how important they are to performance. And then we had them sort them into categories and we combined everything and we came up with 7 clusters. So that's where we stand right now.
Fantastic. And can you share with us what you found in terms of the outcomes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the 7 clusters, I can start by summarizing them and then we can go deeper into any or all of them. So the first one is stress management. And so this is really a matter of like sport life balance and directing your energy into more than one area of life so that you feel that balance. The next one is like embracing challenges, and the best way to think of this is resilience, like looking for challenges and having more of a growth-based mindset where you see mistakes as learning opportunities rather as points of failure. We also have self-awareness, which has a touch of self-compassion in there, which is basically being able to let go of that inner critic and being able to like focus on like self-awareness and what you need in the moment and how you're feeling in the moment. And then we've got team relationships. So feeling like you have good relationships with your teammates and coach. And then social support in general. So feeling valued as an athlete, but also as a human. And then we had, what am I missing? Mental skills, which is like the sports psych skills. So it's like motivation, focus, concentration, goal setting, mindfulness, imagery. And then the final one was commitment to sport, which isn't like forcing workouts. It's more about being intentional with a training plan, building rest and recovery into your training plan and following that, which is hard for a lot of endurance athletes. Nutrition, sleep. It's more of like foam rolling, mobility, making sure you're taking care of your body so that you're ready to perform. And so those are the 7 clusters.
Awesome. And I was thinking, is that an order of priority or just the way you're sharing the information? Is that is that in terms of the highest priority should be around stress management and go from there? Because is that where athletes are most susceptible to, overtraining and stress, becomes, I guess, overwhelming and they don't perform at their best?
Yeah, great question. So that's why. So it's interesting. One of my colleagues, my supervisor, he's our vice president of operations here at Premier Sports Psychology. It's a group consulting firm in practice, and we were working on this project together. And he asked a really important question that really helped change and pivot in a new direction for this project. And he said, "Well, what about behaviors that might be important for performance but not mental health?" Like, as a former Olympian, he can definitely recall times where his workouts were not supporting his mental health, or even the way that he may have been treated, or some of, the training regimen when you're really like getting ready for that A event. Sometimes mental health takes the back seat. And then there are other times where you have to prioritize your mental health and let go of that performance. So we asked all of our participants to rate each item based on the importance. And so the two most important things for mental health were social support, and then embracing challenges, which is that resilience growth mindset. And then it was closely followed by self-awareness and self-management or stress management. So all four of those kind of clustered together for the mental health. And then for the performance, it flipped, except for one. Embracing adversity stayed at the top. So if you want more bang for your buck, it's that embracing adversity piece and that resilience. And then the other one that was important for performance was commitment to sport, having your body physically primed and ready to go.
Yeah, and it is certainly supportive of the outcomes that they found from that Harvard study, which I believe is still continuing today. The study on happiness or longevity. It's I think it's called the longevity study, and where they found the most important thing to our happiness or mental health is around social connection. Mm-hmm. And so what the athletes have relaying back to you is that team support, that that people have your back and that they're there for you in the good times and bad times. And, you can share that distress after, losing that race so narrowly. Because, at this elite level, it comes down to split milliseconds and, it's just phenomenal. And you can just make one tiniest mistake and it costs you the race.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And it's so important, it's been fascinating for me because I'm also an athlete and I'm actively competing. And so this is also like me studying myself, but in a more objective way. And it's been really cool because some of the questions with the social support really also tap into your relationship with your coach and your teammates. And that is so important. And I think for me personally, having a coach, like I DNF'd or I dropped out of a race last weekend and texted him immediately after, angry, like I quit, right? And he was there ready for me. And then, when I won today earlier, he was there for that as well. And so it's being able to be really honest and open and vulnerable with your coaches and your teammates so that they can see the authentic you and your true self. You don't feel like you're always on, because with sport and performance, we're often on, and that's really emotionally fatiguing and draining. And sometimes you just have to take off those layers and cry, vent, rant, do whatever you need to do.
Yeah, it's so very true that we, I guess, show our true feelings, because then people can really provide the support that we actually need, as opposed to masking and saying, yeah, I'm okay. Yeah.
Right.
I've moved on, but deep down you haven't. And that could really, affect an athlete's overall health and well-being. And I was also just thinking then that in that, like that Olympic team setting, you would have, team members that are competing with one another. And so that, also adds a bit of, well, certainly a shift in dynamics around that team relationship, and being able to, I guess, leave it on the track or leave it in the pool, or and then be able to be mates outside of, I guess, what's happening on the track or in the pool or wherever it may be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I see it also with my high school clients, a lot of my cross country runners and track and field runners. There are only so many places on the varsity team. And so they're often competing against each other while supporting each other. And that's hard to do. That's really hard to do.
Yeah, I agree, because the other thing is, you know what the other teammates are doing around their training, and you think you need to do a little bit more, which goes on to what we've spoken about earlier about it, this overtraining. So yeah, because they're obviously monitoring. Okay, my competition's doing this, so if I do an extra hour on top of that, I'm going to get the edge. And
Right. Yes.
and you mentioned that stress management. And I've, read a lot about heart rate variability and how it's a good indicator. And, a lot of what you do is outcomes, assessments and looking for these leading, lagging indicators for, for performance and recovery. So I was wondering, how do you measure that stress, a person's stress management? Is it a questionnaire, or is it actually you're looking at heart rate variability and those sort of measures?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's basically, so it's self-report. And so, which there's always going to be limitations with self-report information, because people often think they may be doing something more often than they actually are, myself included, right? Like I might say that I'm good at foam rolling and working on mobility when realistically I've got some work to do. And so it is a self-report questionnaire, and it asks questions about basically like, I'm intentional with how much time I spend in each area of my life: sport, family, school, work. I have interests or hobbies outside of sport that contribute to my mental well-being or emotional well-being. I have a good balance between different areas of my life. One that's really important that's on the questionnaire is I'm willing to say no to extra commitments when I feel maxed out. And so that's the nature of that stress management, is basically working on those personal boundaries at, when is it time to say like, nope, I'm done for the day, or I'm going to say no to this extra opportunity or this commitment. Granted, there are times when athletes may not be able to say no, right? And so sometimes, based on like I have collegiate and professional athletes where that might not be an option. And so that's where that second category of that self-awareness comes in, is knowing when they need to take a break and knowing what that looks like and feels like. And heart rate variability can be one. And so knowing, like if that's really low, and we've got a lot of people who, including myself, I wear a Whoop. And so I watch my own recovery. And my coach keeps an eye on it, and other athletes are, going into this as well and tracking like, how am I doing today? And if they are, the self-awareness is so important. If they're feeling like they're overtrained or starting to feel burnt out, it's important to be like, have a sit down with coach and have that honest conversation with them and say, hey, I need a break, or we need to dial things back. So all of these like overlap with each other, which is what's so cool about it.
Yeah, I love it because it's holistic. It's looking at all aspects of their life. You mentioned that family balance, that, that social connection, them getting, we've mentioned nutrition, sleep, obviously the different levels of training or different types of training, which you mentioned mobility, and, you've got your high intensity sort of training. And yeah, so it's a real good mix, and it's all about them, finding that balance that works for them, which is incredible. It's because in the past it's all about doing more. It's been doing more. I got to do more. I got to do more. I got to do more.
Right.
And by doing more, I'm going to be better.
Right.
Yeah.
And we were kind of like, I was a little worried about what we would find. Like it's scary to put research in the hands of other people. And it starts as qualitative research with this open-ended question. And I did not know what they were going to say. Like, what if they say like, no pain, no gain, or this kind of like old school mentality, like what's going to show up, like push through the difficulties. Right. And that was not the case. And it was a relief for me, but it was also really cool and exciting to see so many professionals and coaches and athletes saying like, no, self-awareness is really important. Like you need to know when to dial it back and take a step back. You need to prioritize relationships with other people. So that was really neat. I was expecting a lot of kind of the traditional sports psych skills, like goal setting and motivation and focus. And there's definitely some of that in there, but it's only a small piece of that model. So it was really cool to see all of these different facets of well-being.
Absolutely. And I can imagine it's quite challenging for your collegiate athletes and that younger generation, the millennials, the Gen Zers, because there's so much on the go and happening. And particularly now that, we're opening up again and, social events are back on. And I can imagine, that they could be feeling exhausted. They're quite aware of them feeling exhausted, but they have that FOMO, I can't miss it, Yeah. So it would be certainly a lot more challenging for this generation today, in terms of saying no and being able to say, no, I'm too tired. Yep. I'm going to rest and chill out. No, I'm going to have family time. I'm going to prioritize the family. I've, been out enough. And
Yep. Yeah. And it's neat because I think teams really have, we all have an opportunity to contribute to team culture. Coaches have a huge opportunity because we know that change always comes from the top and culture comes from the top. And so when you have coaches who are really prioritizing well-being, you can tell. I think about some of my athletes and those who I work with, some of the teams I work with, and it's really neat because there are some coaches who really prioritize academics and they want their collegiate athletes to be just as strong in the classroom as they are in the field. And then we also see some of the guys who will normalize being, I do a lot with ADHD testing and learning disability assessments, which for some athletes could be really scary or stressful or carry some stigma. But the guys will be like, yeah, do it because it's really helpful. You should go. I got it done too. So they're helping to take away that stigma and say yeah, take care of yourself. And then there are other teams I know who will participate in a dry season together where they choose not to drink any alcohol for the season, which is huge as a college student. That's awesome. So it's really neat to see the teams really taking the reins and saying who do we want to be? What does that look like?
I was just thinking, in terms of that, the 43 you studied, what was the gender mix? And did you notice any difference in the responses around the gender? Because, if I was to be generalized or stereotypical, I would see the women being a lot more connected with, self-awareness and, and prioritizing relationships. And, if I was to be, gender biased or whatever, that the males is more around, performance, training hard, pushing. Did that come across in the research?
Not yet. So we're collecting data on that right now, actually. And I have to wait until I get enough people so I can start crunching the numbers. Our initial participants were about 2/3 women and 1/3 men, which is not uncommon for this type of research. And we had a really cool group of people. We had 17 sports represented or something, really wide breadth. And so that was really neat, but it was 2/3 women, 1/3 men. And so I'm curious to see what it's going to look like. I have a lot of female athletes who are so hard on themselves, really perfectionistic. So I'm also curious because there's also that masculinity piece that doesn't jive really well. I think some people are afraid of self-compassion because they don't want to go soft, when really it's not about that at all. So I did see one study that talked about self-compassion and looked at the differences between gender. And it was something along the lines of self-compassion was more potent for women than men in athletics. And I think they did a self-compassion intervention. So it might've been a mindfulness reflection type of activity. And then I think they measured levels. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out with that.
Yeah, totally. I see this perfectionism with, the women I consult, and, really it's they're really hard on themselves, as you said, and it really affects their mental health. It's that inner critic is always saying, you're not good enough. And, they're self-sabotaging themselves and that, really puts them down. So what advice do you give your female athletes or it can be males as well around this perfectionism? Because I know it's big in the athletic world because it's all about perfecting your art, your skill.
Yes. Yeah. I use a lot of different analogies. And so I use acceptance and commitment therapy in my work, also known as ACT. There's an Australian psychotherapist by the name of Russ Harris who does really good work in this area. And he also uses a lot of analogies. And so one of the analogies that I really like is this sense of like this like tug of war. And so often people are told, well, like just, like drown it out with positive self-talk, right? But you're wasting energy when you're doing that. And so some of the ACT practitioners talk about this inner tug of war where you've got this inner critic, this negative self-talk, and then you try to like talk back to it and say like, no, and then be more reasonable. But you're exhausting yourself when you do that. And often, honestly, we don't believe it anyway. And so what I say to my clients is drop the rope. Like stop engaging in that war, like let your inner critic, like I think of like little gremlins or demons on the shoulder chatting away, like take them with you. And don't let them, it's like, okay, I hear you. Like, thanks for the feedback. There's a lot of the ACT practitioners talk about this thank your mind or thanks brain. And so I say like, let's say I work with a lot of teens. So I say, do you have any younger siblings who talk a lot? And they usually say yes. And if they don't, then I say, do you have parents who give you unsolicited advice about a sport that they've never played? And they often say yes. And I say, and what do you say to them when they talk or they provide advice? You don't want to be rude because they care. And it's usually like, thanks for the feedback. Really helpful. Thank you. But there's a note of sarcasm there, especially with my 13 and 14-year-olds. And so I say, that's what you do to yourself. That's what you do to your brain. So your brain starts talking. You're not good enough. You don't deserve to be here. You're not going to make it. You're not D1 material. You're not this, you're not that. Just say, thanks, brain. Thanks for the feedback. Super helpful. Really appreciate your commentary today. And so that usually works really well because it's a way to kind of distance yourself from those thoughts so you don't get as sucked into them.
Yeah, I like it because you're actually acknowledging that it's there. You're not dismissing it, right. But you're dampening it. You're turning the volume down.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Another one that can be really helpful is this strategy where you say, let's say like, I'm not going to do well today, or I don't deserve to be here. We'll just say that I'm not good enough because that's a really common one. So the thought might be, I'm not good enough. Then you add to the beginning of that statement, I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. And then you add one more phrase, I noticed I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. And all of a sudden it's a little less potent because now it's just a thought that you noticed that's passing by. It's not the truth. Yeah. And so that's another strategy. And so all of these strategies are a way to just kind of accept and to notice these thoughts when they come in and then let them go and make room for other more constructive thoughts.
So you're really becoming that observer as opposed.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. So yep. you're stepping away and watching it and observing it. Yeah. That's great.
One of my favorite questions to ask my athletes is like, how is that working for you? Because often the inner critic is not helping. Especially when you start to kind of unpeel the layers of the onion and dig deeper. It's the best performances that they have are often the ones where they feel the most confident or they're having the most fun. Like the ones that they're really tearing themselves apart usually are not the best performances. And so I help them kind of explore, or I approach it with curiosity, being like, I wonder. And then I help them kind of realize that on their own, which is a fun process.
I can imagine. And I'm just thinking my next question is for that person that's taken on an event that they've never done before, like you did, in terms of your 10K, 21K, marathon, and same with the triathlon, sprint and Olympic distance, so on, all the way to Ironman. It can be very daunting, taking on a challenge or an event that you've never done before. And there can be a lot of that self-doubt and, you can be training in the lead up to it. And it can come closer to the event day where you're starting to doubt yourself. You might not, your training sessions might not be as great. Might not be feeling all that great. And I was thinking, how do you get athletes, because you just mentioned how important it is. The performance is really indicative of how confident you are going into it. How do you really get that confidence built up just before event day, even though your performance and your training might be a little down?
Yes. Yeah. That's a fun question because it's something that I talk about a lot with my athletes is sometimes they'll come to me and say, well, I just don't have any confidence. I can't do it. Right. And so I ask them, what would a confident Anthony look like? How would a confident Anthony act or behave at the event? Eye contact, posture, how assertive or aggressive someone is out there. In endurance sports, racing your own race and not being too affected by what other people are doing around you because you know your numbers and you know your body, right? And then what would an Anthony that is really doubting himself and really lacks confidence, what would that look like? Right. And so then we say, like, start with the behaviors because the research shows that the behavior comes before the feeling. Like you have to act confident before you feel confident. And so that's one thing I say is like, and then they're like, well, I'm not going to believe it. Right. And then that's where we say, like, just sit with where you are in the moment and trust the process because you've trained for it. And when we start catastrophizing or thinking about the past and the workouts that you missed or the future and what's going to go wrong, you're losing, again, that energy that you could be spending on the moment and the here and now. And that's what's so important to sport is, getting in the zone. And so that mindfulness and acceptance work actually helps athletes do that.
Yeah, and also I remember this old saying is fake it till you make it. So that's that real, as you said, you got to have that, you got to act the way you want to be when you're confident and then you'll feel that way. And it's very much that visualization, isn't it? As you just took me through then is, how is Anthony when he's at his best? What does he look? How's he feeling? And that's a visualization exercise that
Right. And it's helping with that, that self-awareness piece with the athletes is like, what do I look like and how do I act when I'm feeling this way? And, with confidence, we know there's other things that can go into it. And you think of it as like scaffolding. You're slowly leveling up and thinking about, how can I push this skill set? And by doing it more often, that helps. We also know seeing other people like you succeed or do something also helps with confidence because I know, well, if I saw her do it, then I can do it too. And especially the more similar that person is to you, the more confident you'll feel that you can do it as well. So sometimes that's also helpful in working with folks. But I really like to focus on the person is like, tell me about a time in the past when you haven't felt confident. And then you surprised yourself. What happened there? So another thing that I often do is, and this gets to some of that self-awareness work too, that's so important is like knowing what your values are as an athlete. Like what's important to you? Why do you do it? And let's set aside the score or the rating or the podium or whatever it is that you're chasing. Like, let's set that aside. If we didn't care about that, we'll just pretend. How would you show up? Like, what would that look like? And that can be kind of refreshing because it gives athletes something different to focus on. Especially some of like really my teenagers, I think it's really helpful for them and being like, oh, I actually have control over a lot of the things that I do. And being a good teammate, taking feedback well, working really hard, hustling, communicating, things like that.
That's great advice. And, I've also heard in the past that, focus on the process and the steps and not the outcome. And, we can get too distracted by the outcome. I want to be up on that podium with the gold medal around my neck. And as opposed to, just go through the paces, the steps that you've trained so over and over again and just focus on each little step, tweak or whatever you need to do to your performance and focus on perfecting that, and the outcome will come as a result of you doing the process well.
Right. Yep. You've got to trust the process. And I say it to my athletes all the time. And even though it's cheesy, it's so true because if we're focusing only on the outcome, like we're not going to get there. We have to focus on all of those little things. And that was part of the research that showed up too, is creating really specific and small goals to help you reach your big ones. And to create goals that have nothing to do with your time or your place or a medal. And that I think is also important, like little milestones for people to celebrate those successes because we can't control our competition. And so you've got to create goals that you've got some sort of control over. And, places like sometimes I'll say to folks, like if you had a really awful performance and you won because not many other people showed up, or you had your best performance of your life and you weren't ranked, like, what would you prefer? And it's often, the medals are nice, but that performance and you and being proud of how you showed up, that's arguably more important.
It's so true, because you could do a PB by a fair distance or a fair amount of time and still not get the gold medal, still not be on the podium, but you've excelled yourself.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So it's important to celebrate those little victories along the way, and to, I think some people, myself included, I get sucked into this where we're always chasing the next thing, right? But we've got to celebrate those little things along the way so that we don't lose sight of that journey and that process.
It's true. It's really that gratitude and, giving thanks for what we've accomplished, as opposed to being too future oriented, living in the here and now. And being grateful for what we've accomplished at that point. So, yeah, the other one I was thinking is just before the event, because that's when, you can actually prepare really well up until the day, feel quite confident, but then the nerves get the better of you, just at the start line. And if it's a short race, you don't have much time to, really recover if you have a bad start or whatever. So how do you work with your athletes around, at the start line?
Yeah. So a couple of things. I love to help people prepare for their events. And it starts like the week of, ideally the week before or a few days before. I make sure being like, okay, what do you have control over? Sleep, nutrition, hydration, electrolytes, mobility, like all of these little things, packing your bags, checking the weather, making sure you have all of the things you need. And so I'll get really prescriptive with them and being like, okay, how much sleep do you want to get? What time do you need to wake up in the morning for the competition? So let's assume it takes you some time to fall asleep. And so then I'll get there and go step by step by step. But then I'll also talk about right before your event, you need to set aside 5 to 10 minutes to just chill. Go to a corner, find a place with no one else around you, put your hoodie up, put in your favorite song, do something for you, because otherwise we're too frantic and our sympathetic nervous system is just going awry and being like, okay, I'm ready. But we've got to bring that down before we throw ourselves into the event and that whistle blows. And so I say, set aside some time to bring yourself back down. Deep breathing is awesome. Because we know that's one of the best and most effective ways to bring down that sympathetic nervous system. So your body is a little more balanced in the moment. And that really helps with the pre-race or the pre-competition jitters. So, yep.
Great tips. And I've certainly observed that with the swimmers. They've got their hoodie, they're listening to their music and, they're doing their little routine to get them in the zone. So I've really noticed that.
Michael Phelps got a lot of slack for that on social media a few years ago. And that's exactly what you need to do. It was perfect. He had his noise cancellation headphones, his hoodie up, he was doing exactly what he needed to get into the right mindset. And what I say to athletes is it's okay to say to your teammates or your parents or your significant other, I'm going to go jitter now. I'll be back. Right? This is your performance. It's okay to prioritize yourself in that moment and say, I just need 5 minutes. And that's where you can do imagery, for swimmers, especially sprints, you can visualize the whole race if you want to. Use all 5 senses, make it as vivid as possible. We know that that's the best way or the most effective way for imagery and visualization is smell the chlorine. Feel the temperature of the water when you first get in. Feel the tile for the flip turn. Visualize the flags over you. All of these little things. That's what you need to include in those visualizations. That's what's most helpful.
Engage the 5 senses. Fantastic. I really like it. Just thinking in that situation in the lead up to the event, there might be a niggling injury, that the person gets in training and they're thinking, oh no, I'm only 2 weeks away or a week away. And how do you get the athlete beyond that point to get, provided obviously the injury can, heal in that, provided it's not threatening to the race, but it's, it's just that it's more the mindset associated with that little niggle.
the fear of re-injury is huge for athletes, especially because I think as athletes, our athletic identity is so important to us. And so when you take away the opportunity to compete, or even the idea of not being able to compete, that's terrifying. And so what I say to the athletes who have like a little niggle or a small injury is, again, like, you're going to recover so hard this week. Like, this is your new sport. You're going to rest. You're going to listen to your body. Like, you're going to go to PT. You're going to do the exercises that they tell you to, because we know that a lot of athletes do not do them. And so it's like, those are your priorities this week. And then it's really listening to the professionals and what they have to say and following their advice. And if it's like a B or C, like a second or third priority race, and it means prioritizing your body for the long game, then I'm usually more conservative. And I say, like, sit this one out. It's not worth it, right? Like, if you're still having pain, and it's not like discomfort is different than pain. And so it's helping them with like the difference between that, which is also really hard to do. So yeah, the injuries are really hard, really hard. So I say, like, listen to your body, and, do whatever you have in control, which is often like rest and recovery and mobility, icing, fun stuff like that. Yeah.
It's like focusing on a new process to get you back on track. So a little bit of a diversion off the path that you sort of set out, a little diversion, but you get onto that process, focus on that, and you'll get back onto your path ready for the big race.
Yep.
Yeah. Love it.
And it's often, that was what we found through the research too, and that's like the embracing adversity is when these unexpected situations come up, we as athletes have to be flexible. And that's one thing that I'm often talking about is this idea of mental toughness. There's definitely a time and a place for that, but not when we're like injured and trying to force something and like tough it out. Like, no, that's when we get re-injured. And so it's trying to, like the mental toughness piece in this adversity, like small injuries, that's definitely adversity. And so it's being able to be like, okay, I didn't plan for this. How can I pivot in a different direction and adapt and flex so that I can support myself? Same thing in a race or in a game. This is not what I planned. Okay, I don't have control over this. How can I pivot in the moment and refocus and redirect? Like, those are often the most successful athletes, the ones who can pivot when needed.
Yeah. So be that adaptive person. It's that resilience, isn't it? It's this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It really is, like letting go of mistakes when they happen. Like you turn over the ball, like, okay, get to the other side of the court. Like it's, it happens.
Yeah.
And when we start trying to like make up mistakes or trying to like, people who will miss workouts, I used to do this. I'll just double up the next day. Like, no, just trust the process. Like, you missed it, it's gone. That's okay. You're not falling behind. Just do one day at a time.
So it's that letting go, isn't it? Like, I've made a mistake. I've turned the ball over. I just got to let it go, move on.
Mm-hmm.
It's new point, as opposed to dwelling on that previous point.
Yep. Because if you're focusing on the last play, you're not focusing on the current one. And then you're going to make more mistakes, and then you're going to dig your hole deeper, right? And then you're just not going to have a good game. And so you've got to be able to just let it go, which is really hard to do.
Yeah, that reminds me of Dr. Adam Fraser's work. He was looking at high-performing athletes and really, why did the top 10 really stand out from the rest of the field? He was studying the tennis players, and what he found, it wasn't their agility, their power, or their serve or anything like that. It was all quite evenly matched relatively. And what was the real difference is how the athlete responded between points. So whether it was a good hit or whatever, they had that positive reinforcement and it built self-confidence and all that. But it was that one where they missed shot or whatever, that it's what they did, to get themselves ready for the next point, as opposed to dwelling on that missed hit and then allowing that to compound. And so, of course, that the third space, which is between A and B, it's right in the middle, and it's what you do in that middle that really counts.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's being able to just like pivot and redirect your energy into like, what do I need to focus on right now? Right. And focusing on like the missed hit is not going to help you. You can do that after. You can watch tape and say, like, I love to do an activity I learned from another sports psychologist called the WWWs and the WWIs. And it stands for after competition or performance, what went well? So what did I do well that contributed to a strong performance? And it can be sleep the night before. It can be pre-race or pre-competition meal. It can be what you did during the event, your warm-up routine, whatever you want, the music you listen to, pick 3. And then the WWI is what's worth improving. So it's not what did I do wrong? How did I screw up? It's what can I do differently next time to do better? And it's more strength-based, which is so important. And so, okay, you turned over the ball. Let's watch to see how. Like, how did that happen? What did you do? Or same thing with, like thinking about other, like you missed a hit. Let's look at your form or your stroke. Or in like cycling, missed the timing for a sprint. Well, let's see when you attacked versus when the person next to you did. That's where we can learn from our mistakes. It's not in the competition. That's not the time to reflect. You've got to perform.
True. It's so true. It's after. Yeah. So let it go. Move on. Later. Yeah, refocus, and then we'll catch up with the coach afterwards and review the replays. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's perfect. Just I guess my final question for you, and it's around it's part of the 7, which I found a bit peculiar was the motivation one. So for me, like I just see athletes as extremely goal oriented. Like so, there was that one which motivation, goal setting, and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's a real strength of athletes is that they can set goals. They're so focused on it. They've got extreme drive, and it can just that can just be their life, and everything else is just secondary, and it's all a priority. So what is it around the motivation? Because it must have come up as athletes must at some periods get demotivated, whether it be maybe an injury or a setback. Mm-hmm. What is it in the research? Why did this motivation come up? And is it their why that gets them back on track? Is that, so that's, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. So I think 2 things that are worth talking about. One is self-determination theory, which is a really well-known theory in psychology. I think it started in education settings and has since been brought over to sport. And to simplify it, they basically say there are 3 ingredients to motivation. The first one is autonomy. So feeling like you have a choice. For athletes, having some sort of choice in the events that you do, the structure of your training, your routine, have some sort of control. And so for coaches who want to improve the motivation of their athletes, give your athletes some more choices, because that can improve motivation, because then they don't feel like they're being forced to do something. The second ingredient is relatedness or belonging. So that's where those team relationships and the coach and athlete support also really comes in, and feeling like you belong and you're a part of the team and you're a part of the community. If you don't feel like you're belonging, you're not going to feel motivated. And then the third ingredient is competence. So feeling like you can do it and like knowing that you're there and you deserve to be there. And so for coaches, providing feedback like all the time on what athletes are doing well, not just what they need to improve, but really specific feedback on like, hey, the way that you responded to that play was so good. Did you notice how blah, 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 right? Like really specific feedback can help with that competence, because athletes are so hard on themselves. And so when athletes feel like they've got choices, they feel like they belong, and they feel like they're decent at what they're doing, they're going to be motivated. The opposite of that is burnout. And so that's when you feel like you're a robot going through the motions. Like, why am I in the sport? It doesn't matter anymore. I'm not that good anyway. That's where the burnout hits. And it was interesting, the research we're doing, we have some initial findings, but there's a negative correlation that was significant between scores on our measure with these 7 clusters and burnout. So the higher someone is with the stress management, the social support, the facing adversity, commitment to sport, the higher they are on that, the lower their burnout. So if someone also wants to help with the motivation, like focus on the basics, get back to building up that foundation.
Yeah, it's so true. I can see how they're all interconnected, your 7 key areas. And particularly, this last point you've raised around, if they're scoring well with stress management and their commitment, and they're very much that resilient nature. So that will allow them to get back on track, to refocus on their goal and to lift them. Whereas, as you said, if they're not doing that stress management and they're feeling low and down, then that bounce back, that resilience is just not there. And we see it with corporates, for example. It's exactly the same. If they're not doing that self-care, that stress management, and they get that burnout, and therefore they're not able to cope with something that goes bad because they've just got no energy to feel
right.
And, it comes back to that autonomy and what's in your control and, focusing. Yeah. So I just love how everything you've spoken about.
It's so interconnected. And I think people like to simplify, we like to simplify things. If it's more simple, then we can do it and it's less daunting. And like seeing a list of these 7 clusters or 113 behaviors, like that's overwhelming. I look at it and I'm like, I can't do all of these things. And it's not, the expectation isn't to do all of these things. Honestly, the expectation is like moderation. Find the right, think of these as like 7 different levers, and they're not all going to be high at the same time. They're going to differ based on the time of your season or the nature of your coaching or team relationships, whether or not you're in transition, how you're performing, like things are going to change. And as long as you're kind of monitoring them, that's what's most important. And recognizing sport is super dynamic. There's a lot to, ebb and flow. There are a lot of changes. Some seasons are better than others. And that's a part of the process, and stepping back to look at that big picture.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Erin Ayala. It's been an incredible conversation with you. I've really enjoyed it. How can listeners best contact you?
Yeah, you can go to www.premiersportspsychology.com. We're also on Instagram, Premier Sports Psychology. My email is also on the website. It's eayala@premiersportspsychology.com. And then my personal Instagram, which is all biking, just as a warning, is Erin E. Ayala.
Awesome. And in terms of that publication, is that available on the Premier Sports Psychology website?
Not yet, but it will be. Yeah, I'm writing it up right now with my team. We have a deadline at the end of the month, so fingers crossed that we get it done. And then we'll be publishing white papers on the website. We'll be adding a research and development or research and analytics subsection to our website in the near future. We'll be posting more of it.
Well, fantastic. I'll incorporate all the links that you've just shared with us, the website, your Instagram, your email in the show notes, so listeners can go directly to there. And end of the month, you can, so that's the end of June, you'll be able to see the white papers and the publication around Erin's great work, Erin and her team's great work. Yeah, Erin, I just really want to sincerely thank you for sharing so much wonderful knowledge, which has certainly empowered me. And I'm sure the listeners are very empowered in terms of what you've been able to share around the most cutting edge leading research around sports psychology. And for the listeners, if you've liked the episode, please like and share it with others so we can get this wonderful cutting edge research out to others that really will help them not only in their sports performance, but in their everyday performance, whether it be being a mum or dad, or whether it be being the best at their work. It will help irrespective of what you're doing, whatever performance you need to do, it will help with, because it's all fundamentally important. And yeah, there's so much evidence that supports it in all aspects other than sports. So please like and share it, and stay tuned for more insightful episodes of Me and My Health Up.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're so welcome.